Hello everyone, how's it going? It is Tyrnor as always, and once again I am back with another top whatever list. This time it is my top 6 favorite forms of magic in the Warcraft universe. Now, as is usual with my videos and with my top whatever lists in general, I'm not taking into account game mechanics and such. If I were, then the list would just be Arcane Mage and Fire Mage because I don't really play any other caster classes, so there you go. But no, this list is obviously my favorite forms of magic, which more or less confirms the cosmology they established in World of Warcraft Chronicle 1, which I'm going to place on the screen. But not entirely. For instance, two of the items on this list, you'll see when I get to them, don't fit exactly into that cosmology, or it's kind of debatable where they would fit. You'll see when I get to the list specifically. But yeah, other than that, I hope you enjoy, and let's begin. Number 6 on my list is Holy Magic, which is something that I like perhaps more for its users, but also the magic itself is something I really find really interesting, I do like. Now, when it comes to its users, paladins are really cool, especially the way they were presented in Warcraft 2 and in the retellings of Warcraft 2. The Army of the Light is really cool. It could have been cooler, but it's still really cool. And priests themselves and their duality between the light and the shadow is also really an interesting aspect of the lore. Now, as to the magic itself, I do really like its three sort of aspects. There's the protection aspect, the healing aspect, and the righteous retribution aspect of holy magic, which is obviously it's sort of tied together with the morality and the perhaps church-like nature of the users of holy magic. It's complicated to explain, but I imagine you get what I mean. So yeah, holy magic I find to be really both interesting and cool, which is double points. Number 5 on my list, and also the first one that doesn't exactly fit into the cosmology of the universe, is Mogul Flesh Shaping. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mogul Flesh Shaping is basically the way the Mogul repurposed Titan technology and specifically the anima liquid in order to use it the same way the Titans have and create new races by mutating existing ones. And the Mogul used this to create the Grummels, the Sarak, to mutate the Yongo, and so on. Now, flesh shaping is not the type of magic you can really apply into combat unless you use the anime logic of the boss is using flesh shaping to augment its minions while you cannot attack the boss but you have to fight their minions. So with the exception of that scenario, you can't really use flesh shaping in combat. So it's also a weird sort of exception from this list because it's also the only kind of magic on this list that does not have any realistic combat applicability. But flesh shaping I find to be both incredibly interesting and also from the point of view that say Vol'jin described it as the darkest form of voodoo, even though it is Titan magic. It is, if not benign, at least neutral at its core nature, but the Mogul, presumably through the way they use it, have unintentionally corrupted it. It's interesting from that perspective, and its potential is also, again, really interesting. I'm going to use the word interesting a lot when it comes to magic because magic in fantasy universes in general, if done right, is interesting, and anima certainly, and flesh shaping rather, certainly fits that. It's also really flexible in the sense that it's been used to create really powerful artificial golems. So yeah, Mogul flesh shaping, number 5 on this list. Number 4 on my list is Fel Magic, which is perhaps a fairly mainstream choice as to what people prefer as magic in the Warcraft universe. Now, I like Fel Magic mostly for the effect it has on its users and on its potential users. it's addicting, it's corrupting. Well, all magic is corrupting in the sense that all magic transforms its users. Just look at, say, the Nightborn, or the Jinnu for that matter. They were transformed by gradually by magic. But film magic is perhaps the most not direct, but the most brutal transformation. It's the most obvious. It turns the user and those near the user gradually into a literal demon. It is a magic that draws its power from other living creatures, and it is a very tempting and addicting kind of magic, which is perhaps a bit paradoxical. It's also very interesting that those who are transformed by fell magic can either gain benefits from it or be malformed by it, and it mostly seems to depend on whether they were intentionally using fell magic or not. Just say, look at the Eradar and the Krokul of Argus, who were both corrupted by fell magic, but one to their benefit and the other not so much. As to the actual uses of fell magic itself, it's not as interesting to me, at least, as some of the other items on this list. It can make fire, for instance. Although it does have some things that are perhaps similar to flesh shaping, in the sense that it can artificially age up an individual. It drains the life out of people. It's a very even when its users are not evil, it is still a very evil form of magic, to say the least, and that's what makes it interesting for me. Number 3 on my list is the other form of magic that doesn't fit in exactly into the cosmology of Warcraft, and is very hard to define exactly regardless. It is voodoo magic. Now, voodoo is, more again, perhaps something that I like more for its users, but also for the magic itself. It is the magic of the trolls, obviously, and what I like most about it is that it provides much more of a mystic allure to the trolls and to the way they are perceived. It makes them far more mysterious, hard to understand, and which is honestly one of the main aspects that I like about the trolls, how weird and yet interesting they are. And now voodoo magic is, again, really hard to define. It has a lot of uses and a lot of terminology that is also really hard to define, a little bit intentionally so on Blizzard's part, since it allows them to use voodoo magic for whatever they may please. But yeah, it is a really I'm not sure if I would say interesting on itself, because it is, again, hard to define and thus hard to explain and explore properly, but its applicability in the lore and the way it's used to further characterize the trolls is what makes it, for me, to make it so far on this list. Number 2 on my list is shamanism, which is perhaps the only type of magic on this list, with the kind of exception of voodoo, which involves the energy that is not, say, present within a user or at a user's command, but rather interaction with other living beings in order to manifest said energy, which is obviously the elemental spirits of nature, which makes shamanism especially interesting for me for that particular reason, because it is, in order to use this type of magic, you need to communicate and ask the permission of elemental spirits. And the shaman itself is merely a conduit, or, say, someone who directs the energy. It does not come from the shaman itself, and the elements can refuse the shaman. It has been described, in order to denigrate it, as a fickle kind of magic, although it is kind of not, since usually the elements will respond positively to someone they trust, for instance, but anyway, that's beside the point. Shamanism is also really cool for me because it is probably one of the most powerful forms of magic, in the sense that it has been used to destroy entire cities, for instance, or entire fortresses as well. it can be incredibly potent when the elements agree to the user's particular request, or when the elements themselves decide to take action. For instance, the elements of Draenor took the form of a single elemental entity to fight the orcs, and then Gul'dan beat them, but that's also besides the point. So yeah, shamanism. If I were in World of Warcraft, if I were not the number one spot on this list, I would probably be a shaman, because this idea of communicating and being an instrument of, say, the natural world. Instrument is perhaps a bit harsh, but a regulator and the conduit for the natural world and its energy to manifest into our world seems really interesting to me. And also, it does not hurt that most of my favorite races, in general, with our exceptions, also practice shamanism, so there you go. Before we move on to number one, I'd just like to talk a little bit about an honorable mention for this list, which is necromantic magic. Now, why is this not on the list itself? Because I mostly like necromantic magic, not for the magic itself, because honestly I feel that the zombie trope is a little bit overused in fiction in general, and not necessarily in Warcraft in particular, but yeah. What I like most about necromantic magic in the Warcraft universe is not the magic itself, or the zombies and the undead and such, but rather its ethical and scientific, perhaps you could say, implications in Warcraft, namely the way the Kirin Tor treated, and this idea of utilizing, well, corpses for combat, which is obviously morally reprehensible, but it's interesting when there's the characters like Kel'thuzad was initially, before he became a servant of the Lich King, of, well, we have to find weapons to fight the orcs, so necromancy is logical from that perspective. But yeah, so that's why it's an honorable mention on this list. It would be perhaps a bit further back, because as a form of magic itself, to me it's not that interesting, but rather I like its implications in the story and on the world of Warcraft itself. Number one on my list is arcane magic, which is, with the arguable exception of voodoo, the most complex form of magic in the Warcraft universe, and also one of the ones most explored in novels and other expanded universe material. Now, another reason why I like arcane magic is because it is perhaps what you could describe as one of the most scientific forms of magic in the Warcraft universe. Spells have to follow very precise formulas, and they need to be used properly in order to be used properly. Now, to explain, perhaps make some parallels with the other forms of magic on this list. Holy magic relies on your determination and faith. Fell magic relies on you drawing out power from your surroundings. Voodoo relies on spirits and some other weird entities. Elemental magic relies, well, on the elements. And flesh shaping, much like arcane magic, relies on complex. It's been described as, say, mathematical formula, but it's not just that. It's also the mage's personal willpower, but also very precise ways to make the magic work. You need to make calculations, recite formula, and do all sorts of things in order to make your specific spells work. It really, in that sense, it is the embodiment of order, which it represents on the cosmological scale, and it's the opposite of Fel, in that in order to work, it needs to follow precise formula. If you mess up a spell by, say, saying the wrong word or making the wrong hand motion and such, at least in the novels it's explained as such, it can, well, at best not work, and at worst backfire on you. So for that reason, it is an incredibly interesting, since mages themselves have to be very smart characters in order to, well, properly utilize their magic, and as a form of magic itself is also particularly interesting because it requires study in order to master, unlike most of the other forms of magic in the universe, which, well, obviously with their exceptions and with their various bendings of the rules, require a combination of willpower or external elements in order to work. Which brings us to the end of this particular top whatever list. Now obviously I imagine the question on most of your minds is, where is void magic since holy magic is on this list? It would be probably number 7, but it's quite a distance away from number 6 in my personal preference, which is why I didn't extend the list up to 7 forms of magic or 8 or whatever else. But yeah, I would also be very interested to hear which particular types of magic you like most in Warcraft and why. Maybe especially from people who roleplay. How do you roleplay using your particular form of magic? I would also be interested in hearing that. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all later. Farewell.